Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Voice of the Industrial Workforce, What Drives Employees to Contribute More on the Job. We're going to get started in just a minute. And before we do, we want to put a question out there for you. So while everybody's joining and before we get started, I want to know, what is the biggest barrier to industrial leaders engaging with their technical workforce? So put your answer in the chat, and I'll give you a minute. So while you're thinking about that, I'm just going to go over a few items before we start today's webinar. First of all, I'm Kim Heyer. I'm with GP Strategies, and I am your host for today's session. So if you've joined us before, we're so glad to have you back. But if this is your first time with us, I want to send a big welcome out to you. Thank you for joining us. So just to let you know that we are recording today's session, so you will get an email from me in the next 24 hours with a link to today's recording, as well as a copy of our presentation. So even though you're on mute, we always want our time to be as interactive as possible. So feel free to use the chat and share your thoughts with the presenters and or your fellow colleagues. If you don't have access to the chat, you can use the Q&A feature or the raise your hand option to make yourself and your voices heard. So if you do have any specific questions, we do ask that you pop them in the Q&A section so that we can be sure to answer them during the presentation, or if time permits, we can have answers we answer them at the end of today's presentation. So welcome to today's session. The voice of the industrial workforce, what drives employees to contribute more on the job. So over the next 45 minutes, we're going to explore proven strategies to enhance communication, strengthen manager-employee relationships, and boost team satisfaction. So I want to thank you all again for being here. And now I want to introduce you to our presenters today. So our presenters today are Annie McManus. She is our Director of Engagement Strategy. We also have James Garza. He is our Senior Learning Consultant. And just to let you know, with live sessions, we do have some technical issues. So James was having a little camera issue, but he is going to be joining us via, I think, Avatar. Welcome, James. And then we have Lindsay Pinetta, and she is our GP Strategies business consultant. I want to thank you all for taking your time to do this presentation today, and we really appreciate it. Oh, Annie, you're on mute. I just want to make sure.
Hi, everyone. Perfect. And we will actually be kicking off with James today. So I will pass over to James to take us through a bit of an introduction, and then you're going to hear my voice a lot more. So stay tuned on that one.
Thanks, Annie. So today our focus is on the technical and industrial worker, really critical part of the overall workforce. These are your electricians, technicians, mechanics, operators, all those skilled tradespeople who keep our industries running. We have over 17 million people in these roles in the US alone, working in sectors like manufacturing, construction, oil and gas, and utilities. These are a lot of the clients that we work with. They're highly skilled, often trained through apprenticeships or technical programs, usually don't take a path of a traditional education or degree. And their work is evolving really fast. I find myself in working with our clients consistently amazed at the work these people do, the skills they have, and how so much of what they do impacts our world. And people don't really know about it. It's really impressive. But this workforce is facing some serious challenges right now. Technology is really changing their jobs. So with automation and AI and other digital systems, that means that they need constant upskilling, but often don't get the training support they need. There's also a growing skills gap. Nearly 70% of manufacturers report labor shortages, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go. At the same time, a lot of the experienced workers who've been working in these fields for a long time are retiring. Younger talent isn't really filling the pipeline fast enough. and their jobs are also physically demanding and risky. So a lot of safety focus with higher injury rates than corporate roles. So a lot of times they often feel undervalued or invisible compared to office-based employees. And so, corporate employees enjoy flexibility, development programs, clear career paths, and many industrial workers face rigid schedules, limited growth paths, and sometimes outdated perceptions of their profession. So what do they really need? They really need hands-on relevant training, not theory, but real-world practice, visible development opportunities, so knowing what that leadership pathway or just career pathway looks like, and most of all, respect and recognition for what they do. Again, critical work, skilled work. And some companies, again, with the clients that we work with, like in the oil and gas industry specifically, they're starting to lead in this space of giving these workers what they need, offering like simulator training, mentorship, and even technical leadership development. And so if we want safe, efficient operations, we have to invest in the people behind the tools, not just the tools themselves. And that really starts with employee engagement, the work that gathers insight for us about the employee experience, what is working and not working, and more specifically, how the organization and its leaders should work together to drive job satisfaction and growth. And so for industrial workers, engagement means being heard, supported, given those opportunities to grow. And that's the key to better safety, retention, and performance. And it really needs to be a priority on the ground, in the field, in the plant, not just in the office. And I think we can all agree on that. So that's a little bit about who are technical workers and sort of what they're facing today, a profile of who we're giving a voice to on this webinar. So I'll pass it back over to Annie. I think she's going to dive deeper into what employee engagement means for these folks and some of the data and trends that we see within our client work and research.
Great. Thank you, James, for kicking us off with that great overview. As James mentioned, engagement, especially in the industrial sector, is truly crucial because it does directly impact the productivity, efficiency, and innovation that we see. And as James mentioned, this impacts every single thing that we do. It's how our world operates. So I'm really proud to be able to share some of that voice, how we can continue to support these amazing workers. So in terms of, before diving into all the numbers and the so what and how do we move on this, we did want to start with just kind of looking at our X model of engagement. This kind of gives us a practical model to talk about what is that employee experience, and therefore how can we drive and pull the levers needed to improve that experience. So what we have here is this dark blue axis. We have each organization on its path to success, clearly defined organizational values, goals, and a strategy to achieve that success. And what we need, and I just realized there's a spelling error on this, that's supposed to say maximum contribution. So we're going to talk about maximum contribution here. What we need is a level of maximum contribution from each employee. So giving their all, working on the right things, understanding what those priorities are. And at the same time, we have each individual coming to work every day, each employee. They too are looking for success in their lives. And the fun of engagement and the human side is that each person brings their own unique set of personal values, their goals, and their strategy to achieve that personal success. But of course, they are looking for this level of maximum satisfaction in the work that they do. So these two come together on the job. And as we think about this contribution side, we could have lower levels, mid-levels, higher levels of contribution. And with that satisfaction side, again, low, medium, higher levels. Ideally, we want to see as many folks as possible in this top apex. This is where great days at work happen. We're able to meet the needs of the organization, deliver on those productivity needs, and also are proud to work here. We're liking the work that we do. So it's a special place to be. I know that, engagement is always a moment in time. There's certainly days we all walk in going, yep, today's going to be a great engagement day. Something comes out of left field, go, nope, never mind. We're in crash and burn mode today. But want to just acknowledge kind of how that works overall. And before I dive into the actual numbers, I want to talk about kind of those additional levels that we do talk about when it comes to engagement. So we talked just a moment ago about full engagement. We also have this population that's almost engaged. Now, we have a survey behind the data that essentially plots people across this model. The only difference between the almost engaged and the fully engaged is the power of agreement. So if we think about response options on a Likert scale, those that fall into the almost engaged are simply agreeing with the items, whereas the fully engaged are strongly agreeing with those items. And this is going to have to do, again, with things like liking the work, being proud to work here, but also understanding those contribution sides. Do I know what I need to be working on? Do I understand how those priorities support the strategy? Am I equipped to provide a level of discretionary effort? So we refer to these top two as a high engagement population. Now, over to the left, we can see this group called the satisfied not contributing. Very often we see new employees begin their engagement journey here, very happy to be here, no clue yet how to really be an effective contributor. We might also see some folks that are what we call retired in place. They may be satisfied providing a mid to lower level of contribution. Over to the right, that crash and burn joke I made a moment ago, that's going to be in this population over here. So the contributing and not satisfied. What we know about this group is you can only meet the needs of the organization for so long if those satisfaction needs are not being met. You end up in kind of this imbalance with that ability to contribute, where typically one of two things will happen. You may either choose to leave the organization where you can have more of those satisfaction needs met, find more balance, or you may possibly pull back on that level of contribution, slipping into disengagement. So not a good thing from either perspective in terms of how we're able to kind of effectively manage these employees. And of course, the end of the goal, at the end of the day, our goal is a productive workforce. So if we're not able to capitalize and really maintain those high levels of contribution, that is going to be problematic for what we are trying to achieve in each of our companies. So these lower three groups we do refer to as our engagement risk population. Now, over to the right, we do have some data that talks about what we are seeing between that high engagement and engagement risk split for both technical workers as well as our global benchmark. Now, the global benchmark represents over 200,000 responses cross-industry, and the technical workers data set represents over 10,000 responses from those technical employees. Now, we can see in terms of the data here, we have very similar levels of engagement. So when we are thinking about things like liking the work, being proud, understanding those priorities, and really how to provide discretionary effort, we don't see much of a difference between technical workers and those that are cross-industry. But we will start to see, as we kind of dive through different factors and different ways to look at data, we are going to start to see some differences emerge. But I do think that's interesting. Just as a starting point from engagement, we're not seeing too much of a statistical difference there. So the items that we mentioned a moment ago on the X model, those really factor into what we call our individual index. Again, we're thinking of those differences there. And here we are looking, before I get too excited talking about the data, let me talk about what we're seeing on the slide. Orange is representing our technical workers. So this is looking at responses of agree and strongly agree from those employees. And blue, of course, representing the global benchmark, that favorability data from cross-industry employees. So we do not see too much of a statistical difference when it comes to those individual items that plot us on the engagement model. However, as we start to look at perceptions of managers or direct supervisors, and these questions, we do see some differences. These questions that we look at really examine things like trust, the overall working relationship, feedback, recognition, effective delegation of tasks. And in this, this data here, we are able to see about a 7-point difference with lower perceptions coming from technical workers when it comes to how they feel about those immediate supervisors. And we see, again, a little bit more of that gap created when we think about how they perceive executives or senior leaders. Here we have about an 8.5-point gap, again, with technical workers having lower perceptions than kind of our cross-industry standard. Now, I will not share additional data that I'm about to talk about on screen. I will do a little teaser for an ebook that is going to be released soon. And again, for those attendees, we will make sure that when that ebook is released, you will get a copy, so stay tuned of that. But we do start to look in that ebook at some primary drivers of engagement for technical workers. Those do include job satisfaction, recognition, and opportunities for growth. So not only just liking the work, kind of having those, basic resources and tools needed to do their best work, but recognition is so important. Actually being acknowledged and told this is a job well done, that is key and crucial for how we can really acknowledge and engage employees. And as James mentioned, there are typically some barriers to opportunities for growth. Very often, as he mentioned, we are going through kind of that apprenticeship up front. We're having a lot of training and leading up to that official, signing on and diving in. But that ongoing, besides kind of the ongoing certifications or things that need to be done in order to continue, you're not really diving into regular ongoing training. So that's certainly something to consider as we look at how we can engage employees. And we'll continue to talk a bit about those training experiences and opportunities, how we can essentially best equip people in a little bit. But before we get there, I wanted to talk a bit about retention and attrition. So understanding why technical employees stay or leave is important. We need to understand those drivers, and especially to kind of get ahead of those attrition drivers. If we can better understand why people are leaving right now, we can possibly make some changes and tailor what we're offering and what that current employee experience is to combat some of those drivers. So we do see here on the left side of the screen, when it comes to why people stay with their organization, many do stay due to the job itself, that job enjoyment, the work. We also see organizational culture being a driver for many, not only the mission itself, but working conditions as well. We do also see some staying for the economy or compensation, but at much lower rates than those top two factors. Now, we also see some attrition factors here. So many do report no desire to leave. Things are working well. Though we do see compensation reported by about 20% of folks, and also 20% reporting things about the organization and dissatisfaction with either the culture, their manager, that team functionality, the mission itself, or sometimes the work. So it's important to understand that information. Now, as we look at the data over to the right, what we've done is isolate responses of those that say, I intend to leave, I've turned the corner, I'm done with this place. And that's important to look at because the data on the left may be colored by some people that are kind of happy to stay there. We might be more ambivalent about that longer term intent to remain with the organization. But over to the right, we can really see that those that do intend to leave have much stronger attrition factors related to that organizational dissatisfaction. The larger population, only about 20% talk about that organizational dissatisfaction being that key driver for why they would leave. But within those that have turned the corner, we see almost 50% of them saying that is the key driver of why they're leaving. We do also see compensation at a slightly higher rate than the larger population, and also things like personal factors. So this could be upcoming retirement, health, relocation, things that the organization essentially cannot control at that point. But it is very important that we do look to engage employees, ensure that we're creating a culture of purpose, the work is the right fit, we're equipping people to do their best work, not only through the tools and resources needed to do those technical skills, work on the machines, do the, assembly, whatever that may be, but also making sure that we're able to leverage people's talents, allow them to grow and develop, and really thrive and flourish here. So we know that the impact of effective leadership and teams is critical for engaged technical employees. And we'll continue to talk about that a bit more today. Now, I will talk a bit about the impact of those manager relationships, looking at those manager and supervisors and how they are able to impact technical worker engagement. So strong relationships with managers are vital for employee engagement. Technical workers who feel supported by their managers, where there's high trust, strong working relationship, and mutual respect, are significantly more likely to be engaged and productive than employees who have neutral or negative perceptions of their managers. We see almost a 70-point gap here in engagement levels when we compare those employees' relationships with their manager. And while not shown on screen, we do also see that employees with neutral or negative perceptions of their manager are more likely to leave an organization. So the adage that we do see often in corporate, people may not stay for their manager, but they will certainly leave because of that immediate supervisor. It's definitely playing a role within the technical population that we are seeing within the data itself. So with this understanding of the impact that managers can have in an employee's life, what do we do about that? How can managers positively drive engagement? So I will acknowledge that we do often see employees cross industry, but also especially within technical positions, promoted into leadership positions because they excel in the technical skills. However, it's definitely important that we acknowledge and develop people leaders beyond those technical skills who can really effectively support the human side of the work. So, things that we want managers to attend to, encourage employees to use their talents. They may be trained on a certain thing, but there's also going to be some hidden talents, without really talking to your people, understanding more in depth. What are those drivers? What can they offer the organization? We may miss out on some great talents that people have to offer. Asking for and acting on employee input. It's very important to have that two-way dialogue, not only have the open ear for what is needed, but how can we drive positive change? How can we solve some of those barriers that might be getting in the way? How can we make sure that you have the right tools and equipment in a more efficient fashion so that you can do your best work? Very important to have that dialogue and not just listen, but really act on that. I talked a moment ago about recognition and the importance of rewarding achievements and well-intentioned risks. My husband is in the technical space, so I know that there are some days where he is doing everything right and whatever tool broke. And it's a tough place when management comes down and starts reaming him out for something. Why don't we look and take that step back, have that safety moment saying, what went right? You were attending to this, you double checked this. It still didn't work out, but those things we need to recognize the positive as well as what we can learn, debrief on those safety moments, things like that. But it's important to acknowledge, yes, everything went well. It did exactly what we need it to do. And also, this didn't work. Let's have that debrief and really understand how we can improve in the future. Treating each employee as an individual with unique interests and needs. So people are different. This is kind of the fun, cool thing. I know that often it's much easier to treat people as a number, process them through the system, but being able to really understand the unique talents of each person, what they bring to the table, different sides of personality, maybe how someone's able to bring their team together in a different, unique way. Really understanding that and recognizing that and being able to leverage that is going to be a critical skill of managers. Providing regular specific performance feedback is, of course, always important. We need to make sure that people are delivering on what we need them to. And don't shy away from those conversations. That's one thing I've seen across my career is that sometimes managers don't want to have the tough conversations, but by avoiding those tough conversations, you're really doing yourself as their leader, as well as your people, that disservice in not equipping them to understand what went wrong, where those opportunities are, and how they can continue to develop and build. We also see things like delegating assignments effectively without micromanaging. Always the asterisk there. So make sure that you are really passing things off, being clear on what those expectations are, but don't bird dog them. Don't lean over them. Don't, allow them to grow, do the thing. Come back, check the work, make sure we're able to make sure that that's safe. We've done it right, but don't kind of live and breathe in that micromanagement space. Pretty please. We also need to build a strong sense of belonging within the team or department. People that work together need to be able to rely on each other, step in, make sure we are keeping all those safety regulations in mind. So it's really important that people do feel that they belong on that team within the work. We also want to make sure we are supporting that growth and development. And this may look different for each person. So this is especially where we need managers to attend to what is this individual person's needs? Are they interested in learning how to weld or do this other skill or tool? How can we get them the right certification so we are being able to capitalize on those specific technical needs? Continued growth programs. There are a lot of programs and training depending on the area and kind of saturation of the education around the space, but a lot of areas where you can go and get that on the job training or dive into a specific certification or program. So definitely make sure you are keeping an eye out for what is available, and make sure you're able to kind of lean in and support those individual growth and development needs. And lastly, we do want to ensure that we have psychological safety. People need to be able to share their opinions, especially when we think about things like safety outcomes. If I'm not comfortable speaking up and saying, this is a risk, we shouldn't be lifting that, that's going to be dangerous, we didn't mark off XYZ area to make sure that it's safe and no one gets injured, you're going to have higher rates of safety, issues, injuries, all of the bad metrics that we don't want to see increase. So psychological safety is extremely important. We need to make sure that we create and foster that environment where people can share their thoughts and opinions, even if they are kind of divergent from maybe the status quo, so that we can really support our people. All right, well, I will go ahead and take a breath now, and I will pass this back over to James to talk about leadership training needs, how we can equip people.
Thanks, Annie, for that deeper dive. I always enjoy seeing numbers from the engagement practice. It makes me miss working with that team. Don't get to do that very often. But clearly we can see a lot of the what and what increases employee engagement, that slide that you just went over. But how do we make that happen? Managers and leaders don't just step into their roles automatically knowing how to engage or build trust, create a strong culture. And so that's where leadership training comes into play. In industrial and blue collar spaces, it's not just relevant. Again, it's very critical because we know how much leadership directly impacts employee engagement and retention outcomes. Again, one of the biggest issues we're facing in that workforce today. So, that initial question, why leadership training? So historically, leadership training has often been seen as more of a white collar endeavor. Having worked in our leadership practice here at GP, I've seen this firsthand. Logistically, it's usually easier to drive leadership development in a corporate environment, but that leaves the leaders in the field a bit behind or with less access to development opportunities than their peers in the office. But today, we're seeing more and more that mindset is changing, and for good reason. In industrial organizations, like construction, oil and gas, manufacturing, technical skill by itself is no longer enough. The modern workforce needs leaders who can communicate across generations, drive inclusion, navigate uncertainty, champion safety. Again, a big thing we're pinning is the safety aspect, and lead these teams through operational and cultural change. Again, if we think about the evolution of our technical and industrial worker profile of today, as opposed to what it used to be, that's going to require a different mindset. And again, the reality is, in the U.S. alone, we're facing a major industrial talent shortage. Some data from Manufacturing Institute and Deloitte, by 2025, we will need to fill 2.1 million manufacturing jobs. That's, blows my mind. But nearly 500,000 may go unfilled due to skill gaps. And what's even more shocking is that there are estimates of an industrial and manufacturing global talent gap of 85 million by 2030. So that's not just a labor issue, though, it's a leadership issue, because leaders need to be ready to attract and retain that talent. And what is compounding the problem is that industrial settings are often rural, that high pressure, like you mentioned, especially around safety and just delivering on performance, and are becoming more technically complex. Workers are aging out. Many new hires lack experience or exposure. Job seekers are widening that skill gap due to rapid advances in technology. So the more advanced technology we have, even though you come in with experience, it still has a wide gap. And also employee priorities are shifting away from just pay alone. I can go from this organization to another organization, and if it's $1 more, that's where I'm going to go because you're not really offering me anything different. So we link that to the engagement piece as well. And we see that with our clients. Organizations are finding that their green hat or new hires don't arrive with as much foundational knowledge and skill as they once did. There's growing demand for different benefits and needs of this worker. So support around childcare, transportation, flexible scheduling, really because of the changing workforce demographics coming into those industrial roles, with younger workers, more women, technologically versus technically experienced workers. And all of these things require empathetic, strategic leadership. And so if leadership isn't developed intentionally with this new landscape in mind, we leave a lot of those field folks, supervisors and mid-level managers unprepared for the very real people challenges they're facing every day. So when we have leadership training in place, there's a lot of benefits of that effort for a blue collar workforce. Again, it's not just in this context, it's not just a nice to have, but it's also kind of an equity issue. So not only do we need to drive more connection between leaders and our front lines in the field, but we also have to ensure that blue collar workers are not left out of that leadership pipeline or become disconnected from more corporate focused development programs, because investing in their growth brings a lot of massive benefits. You see increased retention. When employees feel seen, heard, and supported by trained leaders, they stay. That is shown in your data as well. Gallup reports that 70% of employee engagement variance is tied directly to their manager. Again, that's in alignment with what you went over and what we see time and time again. And it improves safety. So in industrial settings, leadership just isn't about performance. It's about life or death sometimes. Leaders who can create a culture of accountability, trust, and communication reduce incidents dramatically, that psychological safety like you were talking about. Boosted productivity, we all want that. Our vendors want that, our clients want that, the world wants that. Leaders on the floor are best positioned to identify efficiencies, coach these new hires, and create a culture of continuous improvement. And then upward mobility. Leadership development offers career progression for those who may not have college degrees or that conventional educational path, but have the loyalty and the want and drive, the grit, I guess, if you will, and the field knowledge to lead. And this, again, helps reduce turnover and creates a more inclusive talent pipeline. So it's not just about training the leaders that we have today and serving those needs to serve this evolving workforce. It's also about making sure that those that are in play in the field see a path for their leadership as well, and we're creating access to that. And we see a lot of real world examples of these benefits, here at GP with the clients that we work with. As an example, we have clients that run comprehensive and deep job task analysis exercises, so JTAs, and we help them with that work. And we're seeing more and more leadership and soft skills tasks and competencies tied to those JTAs, moving beyond just the technical skills alone. And the reason why is because the ability to coach, resolve conflict, lead a safe shift is just as critical as being able to wire a panel or operate a digger derrick or troubleshoot a pump. We're seeing those in equal spaces as far as need. And so, what does this look like in practice? Just a few examples of how implementing these initiatives, has brought success. You have Alcoa, global aluminum manufacturer. They invested in frontline leadership training, focused on safety and communication. That's a little preview word for what Lindsay is going to talk about. And as a result, they had a 20% reduction in workplace injuries and also a notable improvement in morale and retention. So again, engagement, safety, all those things that are so critical for this workspace. Another example, Toyota's Georgetown, Kentucky plant. They implemented a peer leadership development program for line workers. And those people that were involved showed faster advancement, lower absenteeism, so they're showing up to work, engaged, higher production accuracy, because training wasn't just top down, it was collaborative and tied to real world plant operations. And then last example, United Rentals. They created a program called UR University, focusing on all leadership levels, including service techs and warehouse leads, really being comprehensive and widening that net of who they're reaching. And those efforts saw a measurable increase in internal promotions and a reduction in external hiring costs. That's one of the biggest things too with retention and attrition is the cost of what it takes to lose someone and get someone back, especially when we think about that talent or skills gap that we're facing. And so what a lot of those examples have in common is they treat leadership as a core part of operations. They're helping to evolve what the industrial workforce of the future looks like. And so we know why leadership development is so critical and we understand its benefits, but should we look for anything in relation to like pitfalls and considerations as we implement these initiatives? So when leadership training fails, it's usually for a few reasons. A couple of those is it's too theoretical. I mentioned that earlier. This is a big one. We hear about it all the time. Industrial workers value practicality. If the content or the experience doesn't map to their daily challenges, conflict on the line, schedule pressures, team communication, it just won't stick. They will not engage. So you have to make sure it's relevant and not sitting in that conceptual theoretical space too much. If it's not endorsed from the top, So if it's not the, we don't walk the talk and talk the walk. If senior leaders don't model or value what's being taught, it gets dismissed, and then culture gets misaligned as well. Also, when it ignores context, field workers have different needs than office-based teams. I think, that's something we see every day. Rural areas, rotating shifts, and just logistical barriers. Like I mentioned earlier, logistically, it's easier to do leadership training and provide that growth path or those career opportunities in a corporate setting. You have a lot of barriers when you go out to the field. Everybody, has to be on the line or on the site, and we don't want to pull them from their job a lot. So, even like lack of transportation, it can all impact like learning access, and where, if I'm a remote on a job site, how do I get connected to this opportunity for, leadership training? And also, knowing that one size doesn't fit all, it just doesn't work. So, a 60-year-old shift lead and a 24-year-old apprentice, they're going to require different delivery methods and communication styles. And again, we're seeing a lot of our experienced workers age out, and the new workers coming in and just having a different viewpoint. As we see that across any industry, any workforce, it's especially relevant here. So we often have to address nuance in how we shape leadership training to avoid that one size fits all approach. And to the earlier point about context, moving forward, while ignoring context is not going to work either. So really, to succeed, we have to build training that reflects the real work, the real people, the real goals. And so what that means is really embedding leadership into onboarding, the technical training, like I said, aligning it to the technical experience and aspects, and also those safety programs. And again, we're seeing that happen more and more, using coaches or mentors from within the organization. So finding those experienced people and connecting them in a meaningful way to these new workers. And then making sure that the learning is mobile, micro learning, especially in the field-based roles, because they have to be on the line. They have to be on site in the plant, doing their job as much as possible. And really making leadership part of the culture, not just a class or a one-time touch point. So, final thoughts on these questions here. Leadership development is not a luxury. In industrial settings, it's a necessity. Again, I can't emphasize that point enough. In a world where technical talent is hard to find and harder to keep, training, our people to lead is the best investment we can make. Again, it builds safety, it builds strong cultures, and it builds a workforce, ready for the future. And, one competency that's integrated into a lot of leadership development concepts and skills is communication, especially top-down communication. Ensuring messages, from the top levels of leadership are consistent, strategic, connected. And I think that's what Lindsay's going to talk to us about next, that leadership superpower.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. Appreciate it. So that's actually a nice segue in. Just as leadership training is not necessarily a luxury, neither is figuring out the most effective way for communication between executives and employees or grassroots workforces. The U.S. manufacturing sector contributed about almost $3 trillion to the economy in Q4 in 2024, which accounted for 10% of the U.S. GDP. And this sector employs approximately 13 million people, or about 8.5% to 9% of the total U.S. workforce. And when you think about those numbers, within manufacturing and industrial companies, plant employees are the heart of the company. They're on the front lines with the power to turn strategy into results. At the end of the day, manufacturing and industrial employees ensure operations run smoothly, quality products are made to the exact specifications, safety regulations are adhered to, and products reach customers in time. And with this understanding, the communication between executives and grassroots workers becomes even more important to ensure employees are implementing the necessary strategies and leaders are considering the needs of those different employee groups and addressing potential challenges to support those efforts. So on that note, why is it important for employees to hear communications from executive leaders? And a lot of this will likely not be new to you because it is very similar, whether it is industrial workers, manufacturing workers, office workers, it really doesn't matter. When you're an executive leader, it's crucial for employees to have communications directly because it builds trust and transparency. When executive leaders communicate openly, it fosters a culture of trust. Employees are more likely to feel secure and valued when they hear directly from those at the top, especially during times of change or uncertainty, which happens quite often. It aligns employees with vision and strategy. Executive communication helps employees understand the broader mission, vision, and strategic goals of the organization and ensures alignment across the company in general. In fact, research shows that executive communication provides clarity and direction, helping employees see how their work contributes to the overall company's success. It boosts engagement and morale. Regular, meaningful communication from executives significantly boosts employee engagement, and studies indicate that executive communications with employees can influence up to 70% of employee engagement levels. And if you think back to some of the data that was shared by Annie earlier in the presentation, a lot of this is aligning, and you can see the trends throughout. Executive communication also enhances change management. So particularly during times of change or transformation or crisis, executive communication is vital. Leaders who communicate with honesty and empathy can help employees navigate uncertainty more effectively, reducing resistance and anxiety. And it also strengthens organizational culture. Frequent and effective communication from leadership helps reinforce company values and culture in general. It sets the tone for how communication should flow through the organization at all levels and encourages open dialogue at each of those levels. Some potential strategies for executives to enhance their communications. Some of those can include regular updates, open forums, feedback mechanisms, but some other strategies are practicing active listening. So executives listening with intent to understand, not just to respond. This builds, again, trust, resolves conflict, fosters collaboration, communication with clarity and simplicity, using clear, jargon-free language, making sure that the points are emphasized and well understood. Harvard Business Review actually emphasizes that great leaders use short, simple words to make messages more relatable and memorable. And perhaps honestly, the most important is be consistently visible and approachable. So regular visibility through town halls, video messages, informal chats, it helps humanize leadership and boost morale. And again, if we go back to some of the, excuse me, data that Annie had shown, we typically do see lower scores for executives as compared to managers in engagement surveys. And this is primarily due to proximity and availability. So the more that leaders can lean in and really show up and be present and provide an in-depth awareness of the issues that people are going through, actively trying to solve problems with them, being compassionate to their struggles, the better that leaders can help drive engagement with employees. Some other factors might be using multiple channels strategically, so combining written, verbal, digital formats to reach diverse employee preferences and reinforce key messages, and leading with empathy and authenticity, showing vulnerability and care, especially during times of crisis. Honest, empathetic communication increases employee loyalty and reduces anxiety. For how can leaders effectively communicate, I actually found a really interesting example that I wanted to share. So there's a case study with a company called Tenneco. They're a global automotive supplier working in the automotive manufacturing industry. So Tenneco is a global supplier of automotive components, and they face challenges in engaging their frontline manufacturing employees, many of whom were disconnected from the traditional corporate communication channels. So the executive communication strategy was shifting from top-down memos to a more personalized two-way communication. They implemented plant-level communication boards, video messaging from executives, and regular town halls. And they focused on recognizing employee contributions and explaining the why behind these strategic decisions. Some of the results that it yielded was improved employee engagement and morale, increased alignment with company goals, and it strengthened trust between leadership and frontline teams. So Tenneco's success really highlights how tailoring executive communication to the realities of the manufacturing floor, such as shift work, noise, limited digital access, can dramatically improve outcomes. And finally, what role does change management play in supporting an effective communication rollout? Change management plays a critical role in supporting effective communication rollouts, particularly in the industrial and manufacturing sector, where operational complexity, shift-based work, and resistance to change can pose unique challenges. So Preparing the workforce for change. Change management ensures that employees understand why the communication is happening and what's in it for them. This is especially important in manufacturing where frontline workers may be skeptical of top-down initiatives. So using structured change readiness assessments helps identify communication gaps before rollout. But the bottom line is change is hard, so be real with it. Share information, problem solve, include employees in the process, and help them understand the context. What's in it for them and what is the most important part? Be realistic and acknowledge change can be difficult, but then be able to state that there's an openness to listen to feedback and work together to achieve success that creates that buy-in and that camaraderie that employees really do feel is important for their engagement. Some other change management strategies: aligning communication with organizational goals. So using some change management frameworks like ADKAR or Kotter's 8-step model that might help align executive messaging with broader transformation goals, whether it's digitalization, safety culture, or lean manufacturing. Tailoring messages to diverse audiences. So manufacturing environments often include multilingual, multi-generational, non-desk workers. Change management helps segment audiences and tailor communication formats like posters, toolbox talks, mobile apps. It builds trust through two-way communication. Effective change management promotes feedback loops such as town halls, surveys, or team huddles so employees feel heard and involved. And finally, change management helps measure and adjust communication effectiveness. So including metrics and KPIs to track how well communication is landing. So comprehension rates, behavior changes, adoption rates. Those are all ways in which change management plays a pretty critical factor in communication with between leadership, employees, and an effective communication rollout. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Annie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lindsay and James. We've been yelled at in the background because we're at time. Go figure, it's a topic we're passionate about, so can't shut us up. So I really appreciate everyone's time today. So if you do need to jump, please feel free. Again, you'll get a copy of that recording. But just a few notes in terms of wrapping this up. So we do see some differences in the perceptions of technical workers between those leadership levels, especially as compared to our global industry. We do know the impact of managers. We understand more deeply now that we've gone through kind of all of that we've talked about today, what can drive that, what we should attend to, leaning into training, not shying away from clear communication. And we better understand some of the data around attrition, retention, some of those other drivers that are very important. So ultimately, as a result, our calls to action, we do believe that it's very important to measure the specific needs of your workforce. Generally speaking, yes, you may have an idea of what is needed, but when it comes to really understanding those specific needs, that's going to enable you to most effectively act on those specific factors. Download that upcoming ebook. As I mentioned, this is going to have a lot more information, a lot more data in that. So we'll certainly alert you all, our great attendees for today, and anyone listening to the recording that registered but couldn't make it. We'll definitely share out when that is available. And reach out to us. This is what we do for a living. This is our passion. This is what excites us. So if you want help measuring engagement, anything about manager or leadership training, change management support, or really any other business consulting needs, there's a person at GP Strategies that can help support that. So reach out to us. And with that, I'll kick it over to Kim to wrap us up officially. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie, Lindsay, and James. I really appreciate you spending time with us today. It was a great discussion. And of course, I want to thank everyone who joined us today, who is listening to the recording, for your time and attention. We do ask at the end of the session if you would just take a minute to fill out our survey, because we really appreciate your feedback and take it to heart. So we hope you'll join us again for another one of our upcoming webinars. So be sure to visit GP Strategies website and view the future sessions. And I wish everyone on the call a wonderful and productive rest of your day. Thank you again, everyone.
This webinar was brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we help organizations transform through their people. You can access more webinars or download additional resources by visiting the GP Strategies Resource Library. The link is on your screen and in the description.